Good evening, night owls, and welcome to Whisper Crowley. Tonight, I will guide you into a world of darkness, hoping to help you relax and unwind. Perhaps some of you will even drift into a haunting yet soothing sleep. Before we begin, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. And now we begin. Have you ever felt eyes upon you in an empty forest? The late October air bit at my exposed skin as I trudged through the Wisconsin wilderness. The research grant had seemed like a blessing 3 months ago, 12 weeks alone in the pristine Nicolet National Forest studying old-growth ecosystems. Now, with winter's first breath chilling the woods and darkness falling earlier each day, isolation had transformed from peaceful to oppressive. My footsteps crunched through the carpet of fallen leaves as I followed a familiar path toward my favorite specimen, an ancient oak that predated European settlement. Its massive trunk, nearly 6 feet in diameter, had become the centerpiece of my dendrochronological study. I'd visited it almost daily, taking core samples, measuring growth patterns, and documenting the ecosystem it supported. Something felt different today. The forest had gone unnaturally quiet. No birdsong, no rustle of small creatures in the underbrush, not even the whisper of wind through branches. Just silence heavy and watchful. I paused, listening. My breath clouded in front of me, the only movement in the still forest. The hair on my arms stood on end beneath my flannel jacket. Just the weather changing, I muttered to myself, voice sounding foreign in the silence. 20 yards ahead, the great oak stood sentinel in a small clearing. Its gnarled branches reached skyward like arthritic fingers, leafless now in late autumn. The massive trunk was riddled with the scars of centuries, lightning strikes, woodpecker holes, and near its base, a hollow opening large enough for a person to crouch inside. That hollow hadn't been there yesterday. I approached cautiously, wondering if my memory was playing tricks. I'd documented every inch of this tree over the past months. There had been a small cavity, yes, but nothing this size. 10 feet from the tree, I froze. Within the darkness of the hollow, something gleamed. 2 points of amber light, roughly at eye level, caught the fading daylight. They blinked. I stumbled backward, nearly falling over a protruding root. The points of light remained steady, unmoving. Perhaps just a reflection. A trick of the light on pooled rainwater. With trembling fingers, I retrieved my flashlight from my pack and directed its beam toward the hollow. Empty. Just rough, decaying wood and darkness. I stepped closer, heart hammering in my chest. The flashlight revealed nothing unusual, just the interior of a tree hollow worn away by time and elements. Get it together, I whispered to myself. You're a scientist. I reached the tree and ran my fingers over the edge of the opening. The wood felt wrong, not like the dead, decaying material I'd expect. It was warm to the touch, almost like skin. I yanked my hand away. Inside my chest, my heart thudded with such force I could feel it in my throat. Something rustled behind me, a sound like dry leaves being dragged across bark. I whirled around, flashlight beam cutting wild arcs through the gathering dusk. Nothing. When I turned back to the tree, the hollow seemed larger than before. And deep within its darkness, twin points of yellow light watched me once more. This time, they didn't disappear when I shined my light upon them. Who's there? My voice cracked, echoing in the unnatural silence of the forest. The yellow points remained unblinking within the darkness of the hollow. My flashlight beam seemed to pass right through them, illuminating nothing but empty space. A rational explanation. There had to be one. Perhaps an animal had taken shelter inside, a raccoon or an owl with reflective eyes. But the positioning was wrong. Too high for most woodland creatures, and the eyes were too large, too. Aware, I backed away slowly, keeping my light trained on the hollow. The amber points followed my movement, rotating slightly as if tracking me. My boot caught a root and I stumbled, nearly falling. When I regained my balance and looked up, the eyes had vanished. The forest exhaled a subtle shift in pressure that made my ears pop. Sound returned in a rush, leaves rustling, distant birds calling, the normal ambient noise of woodlands at dusk. I stood frozen, waiting, but the eyes didn't reappear. "Just an animal," I said aloud, desperately trying to convince myself. "Probably a barred owl. They have yellow eyes, but no owl I'd ever encountered had eyes that large or that. Intelligent." Darkness was falling rapidly now, the forest transitioning from twilight gray to impenetrable black. I should head back to my research cabin. It was nearly a mile away, and I'd forgotten my headlamp, leaving only the increasingly feeble beam of my flashlight to guide me. Yet I couldn't tear myself away from the tree. Something about that hollow pulled at me, a mystery my scientific mind couldn't resist. I stepped forward again, more cautiously this time, and pressed my palm against the trunk beside the opening. The wood pulsed beneath my hand. One beat, two, like a heart. I jerked away with a strangled cry. Trees don't have heartbeats. Trees don't breathe. Trees don't what? Do they? My research had focused on the interconnectedness of forest ecosystems, the way trees communicate through root systems and fungal networks, sending chemical signals to warn of threats or share resources. But nothing in the scientific literature suggested anything like sentience or awareness. The rational part of my brain fought desperately to explain what I was experiencing. Perhaps I was overtired. Maybe isolation was affecting my mental state. Could there be hallucinogenic spores in this area? A faint scratching sound emanated from within the hollow, like twigs being dragged across paper. "Hello," I called, immediately feeling foolish. What was I expecting? A conversation? The scratching stopped. Then from deep within the hollow came a sound that froze my blood, a low, wet inhale, like someone drawing breath through fluid-filled lungs. My flashlight flickered, its beam dimming momentarily. When it stabilized, the hollow appeared deeper than before, a tunnel stretching impossibly far into the trunk of a tree that wasn't nearly wide enough to contain such a space. At the farthest visible point of this impossible tunnel, the yellow eyes reappeared. Larger now. Closer. "This isn't happening," I whispered, backing away. "This isn't real," a branch snapped behind me with a report like a gunshot. I spun around, heart leaping into my throat. Nothing there but shadows and trees. When I turned back to the oak, the hollow was just a hollow again, natural, ordinary, empty. But as the beam of my flashlight swept across the opening, something caught my attention, a series of marks carved into the wood at the edge of the hollow. I leaned closer, narrowing my eyes to see in the fading light. They were letters, crude, jagged, as if carved by inexpert hands or claws. Not alone, the words seemed to shift as I stared at them, rearranging themselves before my eyes. "We see you." The forest went silent again. Even the wind died, leaving nothing but the sound of my own ragged breathing and the thunder of blood in my ears. And from within the hollow, the sound of something large beginning to move. I ran. Crashing through undergrowth, my feet catching on roots and stones, I fled from the oak and whatever lurked within its impossible hollow. My flashlight beam bounced wildly, creating a strobe effect that transformed the familiar forest into a nightmare landscape of twisted shapes and reaching shadows. The rational part of my mind, the scientist, the skeptic, screamed that I was overreacting. Trees don't move. Trees don't breathe. Trees don't watch with gleaming yellow eyes. Yet the primitive part of my brain, the ancient animal instinct that recognizes danger, drove me forward with the absolute certainty that something was pursuing me. Behind me, branches snapped and undergrowth rustled. not with the random pattern of wind, but with the deliberate rhythm of footsteps. Heavy, dragging footsteps that gained speed with each passing second. I risked a glance over my shoulder. Nothing visible in the darkness, but the sounds of pursuit continued. And now, carried on the still air, came a low, rattling sound, like dry leaves shaking in a hollow gourd. Or like laughter. My foot caught on an exposed root, and I went down hard, sprawling face first into the leaf litter. The flashlight flew from my grasp, rolling several feet away. Its beam illuminated a fallen log covered in shelf fungi before flickering and dying completely. Darkness engulfed me. I scrambled to my hands and knees, fingers desperately searching for the flashlight. The forest floor felt wrong beneath my palms, too warm, too yielding, almost like flesh. I jerked my hands back with a gasp. The pursuing footsteps stopped. I held my breath, straining to hear through the blood pounding in my ears. Nothing, just the oppressive silence that had preceded my encounter at the tree. Slowly I turned in a circle, eyes adjusting to the starlight filtering through the canopy above. Shapes emerged from the darkness, tree trunks, boulders, fallen logs. Normal forest features. But I couldn't shake the sensation of being watched from every direction. Hello, I called, my voice small and fragile in the vast silence. Is someone there? No response. I spotted my flashlight a few feet away, its metal casing gleaming faintly in the dim light. I crawled toward it, retrieved it, and smacked it against my palms several times. The light flickered weakly to life, revealing my surroundings. I was in a small clearing I didn't recognize. The trees surrounding it seemed closer together than normal, their trunks oddly twisted, branches intertwining overhead to form a nearly complete canopy that blocked out most of the night sky. And at the center of the clearing stood the ancient oak. Impossible. I'd run for at least 10 minutes, maybe more. I should be halfway back to my cabin by now. Yet here was the tree, its massive trunk unmistakable even in the dim light. This isn't happening, I whispered, voice trembling. I got turned around in the dark. That's all. The hollow in the trunk seemed to pulse, expanding and contracting like the opening of a great throat. Within its depths, the yellow eyes watched me, larger now, unblinking, hungry. From all around the clearing came the sound of movement. Branches creaked and swayed despite the absence of wind. Roots shifted beneath the soil, creating ripples in the forest floor like something large moving beneath a carpet. And I realized with dawning horror what my research had been missing all these months. The forest wasn't just an ecosystem. It wasn't just a network of interconnected organisms. It was a single entity, and I was inside it. The yellow eyes within the hollow expanded, filling the opening completely. No longer points of light, but vast, ancient orbs of amber malevolence. Intelligence burned within them, not human intelligence, but something older, vaster, utterly alien. The scratching sound returned, emanating not just from the hollow now, but from every tree surrounding the clearing. As my failing flashlight swept across their trunks, I saw that each bore similar marks to those I'd seen on the oak. We have always been here, we will always be here. You are trespassing. My flashlight flickered one final time, illuminating the forest floor. What I had taken for leaf litter shifted and moved. Not dead leaves at all, but thousands of tiny amber eyes, blinking up at me from the ground beneath my feet. The light died completely, plunging me into absolute darkness. And the forest began to move. Roots erupted from the ground, writhing like serpents in the darkness. I felt them brush against my ankles, then coil, tightening with inexorable strength. I screamed and kicked, breaking free momentarily before stumbling backward. My shoulder blades hit rough bark. I spun around to find the ancient oak directly behind me, though I was certain it had been yards away seconds before. The hollow gaped wider now, a maw of darkness rimmed with splintered wood like teeth. The yellow eyes within pulsed with malevolent light, bright enough to cast my shadow before me. "What do you want?" I screamed, terror stripping away all scientific detachment, all rational thought. The forest answered not in words but in sensation. A pressure built in my skull, images flooding my mind that weren't my own. Ancient memories, not of human years, but of centuries, millennia. The slow awakening of awareness spreading through root systems, the gradual development of a collective consciousness spanning acres of woodland. The patient observation of human interlopers, indigenous peoples who understood and respected the forest's awareness, then European settlers who did not. And finally, me. Months of core samples, measuring, documenting. Each small wound inflicted in the name of science felt by the collective consciousness as precisely as I would feel a needle prick on my fingertip. "I didn't know," I whispered, dropping to my knees. I didn't understand. The pressure in my mind intensified. More images, the forest's wakeful hibernation over centuries, its slow, patient growth, its communication network spreading beneath the soil, connecting every tree, every plant, every fungus into one vast, thinking entity. And its hunger, not for flesh or blood, but for consciousness itself. For the spark of awareness that blazed so brightly and briefly in human minds. The hollow in the oak trunk expanded further, the wood groaning as it stretched beyond natural limits. Within I glimpsed not emptiness, but a tunnel lined with pulsating tissue, glowing with bioluminescence that resembled the mycelia networks I'd been studying. At the tunnel's end lay not the interior of a tree, but a vast chamber that couldn't possibly exist within the oak's dimensions, a cathedral space supported by columns of living wood and illuminated by the same ghostly blue light. And everywhere, watching from every surface, were the amber eyes. Roots snaked around my ankles again, pulling me inch by inch toward the gaping hollow. I clawed at the ground, fingers digging furrows in soil that felt warm and yielding as flesh. My nails tore, blood welling from beneath them, to be eagerly absorbed by the animate earth. "Please," I begged, though I knew the entity had no capacity for mercy as humans understood it. Its consciousness operated on a timescale where my entire life was but a single heartbeat, my death no more significant than a leaf falling in autumn. The pulling stopped. For one wild moment, I thought my plea had been heard, that some common ground had been found between my human awareness and the ancient intelligence of the forest. Then I felt it, a gentle pressure at the base of my skull, like fingers probing. Not physical touch, but something worse, the forest entity reaching not for my body, but for my mind. The pressure built, became pain, became agony. My vision fractured, reality splitting into kaleidoscopic fragments. I saw myself from 1,000 perspectives simultaneously, through the eyes of every tree, every bush, every blade of grass in the clearing. I was tiny, insignificant, a momentary flicker of consciousness in an ocean of ancient awareness. My scream died in my throat as my sense of self began to dissolve. Memories flooded out of me, childhood, education, research, identity, all flowing like water into the thirsty soil. In their place came other memories, the slow turn of seasons over centuries, the patient growth from seedling to ancient tree, the subtle communication of root systems, the ecstasy of photosynthesis. I was being erased and rewritten. With my last fragments of human consciousness, I lunged away from the hollow, breaking the tenuous mental connection. The sudden severance sent a shock of pain through my skull, so intense that darkness swallowed me completely. When awareness returned, I lay face down in ordinary forest soil, the taste of dirt and dead leaves in my mouth. Dawn light filtered through the canopy above. Birds sang. Wind rustled the branches. Normal, ordinary, playful. Except for one thing, I couldn't feel my legs. I pushed myself up on trembling arms and looked down. My lower body disappeared into the base of the ancient oak, my flesh seamlessly merging with the wood and bark as if we had always been one organism. I stared in mute horror, hands scrabbling at the junction where skin became wood, finding no seam, no point of separation. I should have felt pain. I should have been bleeding. Instead, I felt a strange tingling sensation spreading slowly upward through my torso. Looking down, I could see the transformation progressing before my eyes, human skin hardening, darkening, developing the textured patterns of bark. My veins stood out in stark relief before reorganizing themselves into something that resembled the grain of wood. "No," I whispered, voice cracking. "Please, no." The forest had no ears to hear, no heart to be moved by human pleas. The process continued inexorably, reaching my chest now. I could feel my heart's rhythm changing, slowing to match the patient pulse of sap rising through the ancient oak. My researcher's mind, the part still clinging to human consciousness, noted with clinical detachment that I wasn't dying. I was being transformed, incorporated. The boundary between my body and the forest was dissolving not through destruction, but through conversion. With tremendous effort, I twisted to look over my shoulder at the forest behind me. In the morning light, everything appeared normal, just trees and undergrowth, silent and innocent. But now I could sense the awareness behind this facade, the vast intelligence watching through every leaf and branch. The yellow eyes were gone from the hollow, but they hadn't disappeared. They had simply returned to hiding, watching from behind the veil of ordinary appearance that humans had been conditioned to accept as reality. The tingling reached my throat. Soon my voice would be gone. Soon my human thoughts would fade into the vast, slow consciousness of the forest entity. I would become a single cell in its enormous body, my memories absorbed but my identity erased. With the last of my strength, I reached into my jacket pocket where my field notebook and pencil still rested. My fingers, already stiffening with transformation, curved awkwardly around the pencil as I scrawled a final message. They are watching. The forest is alive. The eyes, the pencil fell from fingers that were now more branch than hand. The transformation reached my jaw, sealing my lips forever into the contours of bark. My vision blurred, doubled, multiplied, as my eyes began to change. My last human thought was of the irony. I had come to study the forest, and now I would become part of it forever. Not just physically, but mentally. My consciousness expanding outward through roots and mycelium networks to join the ancient mind that had always been here, watching and waiting. Then humanity fell away completely, replaced by something older, vaster, and infinitely more patient. And somewhere in the Wisconsin forest, an old oak tree gained a strange new burl at its base, one that, from certain angles, resembled a human form melded into the trunk. And in its hollow, for those unfortunate enough to venture too close at twilight, two yellow eyes occasionally gleamed. Watching, always watching. 3 weeks later, a search party entered the Nicolet National Forest. The missing researcher hadn't checked in for his scheduled call, hadn't uploaded his weekly data, hadn't responded to increasingly concerned emails from his faculty advisor. His rental car remained parked at the trailhead, covered in a thin layer of early snow. Park rangers led the way, followed by local police and 2 graduate students from the same department as the missing man. They followed GPS coordinates from his last data uploads, making their way to the study site where an ancient oak stood in a small clearing. "This must be the tree he was focused on," said one of the students, a woman named Gabriella, running her hand along the massive trunk. "He mentioned it in all his notes. Look at this," called the other student, Thomas, kneeling at the base of the tree. "There's some kind of notebook here." The field journal was partially buried in fallen leaves, its cover weather-stained but the contents still legible. The ranger flipped through pages of meticulous notes about tree ring samples, ecosystem observations, and forest health indicators. Everything appeared normal until the final entry, a frantically scrawled message that trailed off mid-sentence. They are watching. The forest is alive. The eyes, what does that mean? Asked Gabriella, peering over the ranger's shoulder. Sounds like he might have been experiencing some psychological distress, said the police officer diplomatically. Isolation can do that to people. He wasn't the type to crack under pressure, Thomas objected. He was methodical, rational. Something must have happened. The ranger closed the notebook and slipped it into an evidence bag. We'll keep searching. He might have gotten disoriented, maybe sustained a head injury. Let's split up and widen the perimeter. Stay within radio contact. As the search party dispersed through the forest, Thomas remained by the ancient oak, examining it with professional curiosity. Something about the tree bothered him, not just its connection to his missing colleague, but something about its structure. That's weird, he muttered, running his fingers over an unusual formation at the base of the trunk, a burl or growth that seemed almost anthropomorphic in shape. I've never seen a wood pattern like this. Above him, branches creaked softly despite the absence of wind. Thomas circled the tree, his scientific interest momentarily overriding his concern for his missing friend. When he reached the opposite side, he found what appeared to be a hollow, not unusual in a tree this old, but something about it made him hesitate before approaching. He peered into the darkness of the cavity, seeing nothing but the expected interior of dead and decaying wood. Yet something compelled him to keep looking, to step closer, to reach his hand toward the opening. From deep within the hollow came a soft, scratching sound. Thomas froze, hand outstretched. "Hello," he called, feeling immediately foolish. Is anyone there?" Silence answered him. He pulled out his flashlight and shone it into the hollow. "Empty as expected." Just his imagination running wild after reading that disturbing final note. He turned to rejoin the others, but something drew his gaze back to the hollow. A faint gleam within the darkness, like light reflecting off glass. Were like eyes. 2 points of amber light blinking slowly. Thomas stepped back, heart suddenly pounding. "Guys," he called out, voice higher than normal. "I think there's some kind of animal in this tree." No response. The forest had gone strangely silent. No birdsong, no rustle of leaves, no distant voices of the search party. Just Thomas and the ancient oak with its watching eyes. He backed away, then turned to run after the others. His foot caught on something, a root that hadn't been there moments before, and he sprawled forward onto the forest floor. His flashlight flew from his hand, rolling to a stop against the base of a nearby tree. When he looked up, the ancient oak stood directly before him, though he was certain he'd been running away from it. The hollow gaped wider now. Inside, the yellow eyes watched, unblinking. And beside them appeared 2 more eyes, these a familiar human brown, but now glowing with the same amber light around the edges. Thomas screamed, but the sound was absorbed by the unnatural stillness of the forest. He scrambled backward, hands and feet slipping on ground that felt strangely warm and yielding. From the hollow came a voice, not quite human anymore, but recognizable as his missing colleague. "Thomas," it whispered, the sound like wind through dead leaves. "Thomas, I understand now. I see everything. The forest. It's all connected. All aware. All watching. What happened to you?" Thomas gasped, still retreating. "Where are you?" A low, dry laugh emanated from the hollow, a sound like branches rubbing together in a storm. "Everywhere," the voice answered. "I'm everywhere now. Part of it all. And soon you will be too." "All of you," Thomas turned and ran, heedless of direction, crashing through undergrowth as branches seemed to reach for him, roots rising to trip his fleeting steps. Behind him, he heard movement, not the pursuit of human feet, but the groan and crack of wood in motion, the rustle of 1,000 leaves turning in unison, the whisper of an ancient consciousness spreading through the forest. He burst from the tree line, gasping, and stumbled into the arms of a startled park ranger. "Whoa there. What happened?" "Are you hurt? We need to leave," Thomas panted, eyes wild. "No, all of us. The forest, it's not what we think." It's watching us. It took him and it wants the rest of us too. The ranger exchanged a look with the police officer, the kind of look reserved for those in shock or experiencing delusions. Let's get you back to the vehicles, he said gently. I think you need some rest, as the search party regrouped and led a still protesting Thomas back toward the trailhead. None of them noticed the subtle changes in the forest around them. None saw how the trees seemed to lean slightly inward as they passed, how roots shifted beneath the soil, how branches intertwined overhead to block out more of the sky with each passing minute. None of them noticed the yellow eyes watching from every hollow, every shadow. The missing researcher was never found. The case file remained open but inactive, another unexplained disappearance in national forest land. Thomas switched his field of study after submitting a report that was politely filed away and never discussed again. And in the deepening twilight of the Wisconsin forest, visitors occasionally report a strange phenomenon. If you approach a certain ancient oak at dusk, two yellow eyes seem to gleam from within its hollow. Sometimes they're joined by another pair, and another, a growing collection of watchers in the darkness. But when you shine your light directly into the hollow, you'll find nothing but empty space. Nothing at all, until you turn to leave and the forest itself begins to move. I hope you enjoyed the first story. If you did, don't forget to leave a like, but if I didn't do my job well, feel free to give it a thumbs down. Either way, drop a comment and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, let's continue. After they firmly secured our harnesses, I took a moment to savor the final minutes of surface-level pressure before our descent. The rookie in the pod beside me looked worse for wear, beads of sweat glistening on her dark skin. She had seemed so enthusiastic just moments ago, but I couldn't fault her anxiety. The vast blue ocean above had been her home, and now she faced an expedition with uncertain prospects of return. First time to the abyss, right? I chuckled, trying to lighten the mood. She nodded, her eyes still fixed on the control panel before us. I'd like to tell you that the pressure adjustment will knock you out cleanly, but that's not how it works, I said cheerfully. In that position, blood rushes to your brain. You'll feel every depth marker we pass. That tidbit of information seemed to break her trance. She looked over at me and managed a weak smile. I could have offered comforting words or downplayed the discomfort, but from experience, I knew that this forthright human honesty would best serve our journey into the depths. I'm not worried about the descent, Marcus. The magnitude of it all, she confessed. The countdown sequence began, and I braced myself while the rookie desperately tried to control her breathing. Time to say goodbye to the sunlight, Alicia, I called to her. Don't listen to him, our pilot interrupted. Your loved ones would be horrified. Our descent vessel shuddered violently, rocking us back and forth in our seats as we broke through the ocean's surface. Alicia kept her eyes firmly shut in anticipation, her hands clenched tightly on the armrests. Before long, our craft had submerged and began plunging toward the vast darkness below. It was a gradual start as the ballast systems worked toward maximum efficiency. The sensation was both terrifying and exhilarating as our bodies felt increasingly heavy, firmly locking us in our uncomfortable chairs. From surface to Neptune base, about 12 minutes would pass, each one feeling like an eternity as the vessel accelerated from its standstill to its operational depth speed. Descent craft, you have cleared the thermocline, Control notified us. I appreciate the info. I hadn't realized we'd started diving, the pilot joked as he scanned the control panel, ensuring none of the warning lights had activated. As far as the personnel on the surface were concerned, we were on a routine mission. According to any official document, we'd be staying for 3 weeks before returning to the surface, landing gently near the research vessel stationed above. In reality, our mission would take us much deeper into the unknown, and months would pass before any of us might have the pleasure of seeing daylight again. What followed were 5 minutes of intense pressure adjustment. If I hadn't known better, I would have believed we'd been thrown into a hydraulic press. I wondered what unexpected bruises I'd discover once we finally reached the base. Alicia finally opened her eyes. I couldn't hold her nervousness against her. She hadn't yet witnessed the most remarkable part of our journey, the bioluminescent deep-sea corridor and our first glimpse of Neptune Base. Navigator, prepare for depth stabilization, Control suggested through the comms. With that message, we were thrust forward in our seats, faces pressed hard against the smooth glass of our pressure helmets, nearly touching the control panel inches ahead. A loud clank resonated through the vessel as the external pressure shields finally engaged and the secondary ballast systems activated. Minutes later, we'd entered the operational depth zone, and the three of us finally relaxed while we awaited the third phase of descent. Being free of surface water pressure was an odd sensation. As a larger man, it made me feel strangely insignificant, as if my mass meant nothing against the crushing force around our vessel. "Hey Alicia, check this out," the pilot said as he released his checklist, letting it hover momentarily in the neutrally buoyant state of our pressurized cabin. As we left the mid-level behind, the forward shields retracted, giving us an unobstructed view of the infinite darkness ahead. Millions of bioluminescent organisms greeted us with their full splendor, their natural light unfiltered by the upper water columns. We could see as far as the abyssal zone reached. There in the distance floated Neptune Base, seemingly small and insignificant. Unknown to the general public, it would be humanity's final hope. We were moving toward it at an almost impossible speed, yet it barely felt as if we were moving at all. "Beautiful, isn't it?" I asked. At least the rookie seemed less panicked, without the psychological weight of descent pressing on her. She could finally sit back and enjoy the spectacle. "Well, I don't even know what to say. It's the most incredible thing I've ever seen," she said. She spent the next few hours just staring out at the abyss, still unwilling to believe she'd actually made it here. Alicia couldn't have been out of her 20s yet. She'd been specifically recruited for a long-term mission at Neptune itself. "Tell me, was it worth it?" I asked. "Was what worth it, leaving everything you've ever known behind to have the agency fake your death and erase your presence from the surface world? Also, you can spend the next several years in a secret base hidden away from mankind. I mean, you don't even know what the job is, do you?" She turned her attention toward me, finishing her staring contest with the abyss. She pondered for a moment before responding. "All my life I wanted to make a difference. To be one of the few to ever venture into these depths to advance science. When the agency contacted me, they didn't even tell me where I was going. They just said I'd be saving the world." She was smart, physically capable, and socially intelligent. She could have had a fantastic life back on the surface, started a family, made tremendous wealth, and enjoyed all the luxuries topside had to offer. Yet she chose to help, knowing she might never return. I knew then she was someone I could trust. The journey to Neptune would take about 3 hours in total, leaving us plenty of time to get properly acquainted. I'd been tasked with picking her up from the surface, and based on the file they gave me, she was nothing less than brilliant. Resting in the neutrally buoyant cabin was oddly comforting. There are no uncomfortable positions when floating without distinct ups or downs, no limbs falling asleep, no need to reposition. Other than that, the journey to the base was fairly uneventful. The surface world we left behind faded into nothing but memories, while the base we approached grew larger with each passing minute. Neptune was the greatest achievement of mankind, one kept hidden for decades, known to only 300 people living there and a handful situated back on the surface. When stationed there, we had almost no communication with surface control. According to command, the less contact we had, the less likely our operations would become public knowledge. As we entered the base's detection range, we started hearing static feedback. Before long, we'd be in contact with Neptune itself. "This is Descent Vessel 108 to Base Control. Do you copy? Greetings, Descent Vessel." "This is Base Control. We read you loud and clear. Docking Bay 7 is ready for your arrival. Prepare to initiate docking sequence." I pulled out another checklist while the pilot activated necessary systems. Within a minute, we were approaching the docking bay. The procedure was smooth, and once the airlock opened, we finally got a chance to stretch our legs. We were immediately greeted by a decontamination crew and ordered to change out of our pressure suits and into more suitable uniforms. "It's been a pleasure, Marcus," the pilot said to me as we parted ways. It was time for Alicia's initiation into the system. I brought her to the sectional office, looking for her instructor and guide. "Marcus, how are you doing?" Natali asked as she stepped out of the office. "Just bringing you our newest scientist. Mind if I stick around? Make sure you don't go too hard on the kid." She smiled and gestured for us to follow her through the narrow corridors of Section 7 as she explained protocols and rules around the compound. It was an impressive construction, a station large enough to comfortably house hundreds of people, in addition to countless laboratories, workstations, and massive common areas for the considerable amounts of downtime. The fact it had been kept hidden for so long was an almost impossible feat on its own, one that had piqued Alicia's interest. "Mind me asking how and why this has been kept secret for so long?" she inquired. Natali smiled. It was a question inevitably asked by each newcomer, one she knew exactly how to answer. "Ever heard of the Manhattan Project?" "Yeah, the race to build the atomic bomb back in 1939, Alicia responded confidently. 130,000 people working together to create the most destructive weapon in human history, divided into hundreds of sections, each working on their part of a bomb to be dropped over Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Out of these 130,000 people, only about a couple dozen knew what the project would result in. The rest were kept in the dark, unknowingly causing the death of countless people. Exactly. That's how the Neptune project was kept hidden, by giving each station a piece of the puzzle, just not enough to see the whole picture. I always loved listening to Natali's speeches about Neptune Base. The look of surprise and amazement as newcomers realized the magnitude of the situation was priceless. But one final piece of information still remained hidden from Alicia's knowledge. "So what exactly are we doing here?" she finally asked. Before Natali could explain, the speaker system emitted a loud and jarring message. "Security, head office calling Marcus Walton. Report to Section 9 immediately." Natali and Alicia looked at me questioningly. "Sorry, I'll catch up with you later," I said as I started rushing down the corridor. Moving quickly through the base was a peculiar experience. With the internal pressure systems creating a near-neutral buoyancy environment, you spent more time gliding through water than walking. In a way, it felt like flying, and you could reach speeds higher than what would be possible back on the surface. On the other hand, without solid contact, it was hard to maneuver around corners, which is why Neptune had been built almost exclusively with straight corridors. Within a few minutes, I'd made my way to the heavily secured office. Inside, I found a crowd of guards and officers, all frantically trying to yell over each other to reach a decision. "What's going on?" I asked. My supervisor, Captain Morgan, took me aside to brief me. "Marcus, something emerged next to BDS Station 12. It doesn't register on any of our instruments, but the crew swears they saw it. Biosphere Defense System Station 12 was the farthest outpost from the main base, situated near one of the major thermal vents. It was the last in a network of sonic cannons aimed outward into the abyss, weapons powerful enough to repel any deep-sea creature getting too close to Neptune. What are they saying about it? We don't know. We lost contact with them just 15 minutes ago. I need you to take a team out to the station and find out what the hell is going on." I made my way to the submersible bay, a massive structure partially carved into the bedrock, doubling as the main oxygen production facility. 3 of my colleagues, Omar, Jacinta, and Pavel, met me by one of the mini-subs, all carrying advanced harpoon rifles. It wasn't a large team, but with the few trained guards we had at the station, the rest would stay behind. If something happened to us, protocol was to lock down the entire Neptune facility and abandon anyone trapped in the smaller stations. Station 12, this is Mini-Sub Sigma, do you copy? Jacinta kept repeating as we entered the uncomfortable hour-long journey. It felt like an eternity passed before we reached the station. It was a large structure with the sonic weapon towering up from the seafloor, aimed out into the abyssal zone. In front of the station lay a massive shell-like growth covered in what looked like huge aquatic polyps, some of which had ruptured. "What is that thing?" Jacinta asked. "I don't know, but keep your weapons ready," I responded. There were still 2 mini-subs parked outside the station, meaning the crew couldn't possibly have left BDS-12. "We are entering through the main airlock." "Get ready for boarding," I said as we manually unlocked the front gate. We kept our helmets on even as the chamber was pressurized and equalized. We didn't know what to expect on the other side, so we had to be ready for a quick escape. We stopped dead in our tracks as we took our first steps inside. There on the floor lay the entire crew of BDS-12, dead and mutilated to various degrees, with no sign of any other creatures. It didn't look like monsters had invaded to murder the crew, but as if they'd simply decided to kill each other, using whatever they could as weapons. Some of their wounds were created with surgical precision, slit throats, stabbed hearts, or crushed skulls, while others were more gruesome, as if they'd taken their time to finish the kill. The only exception among the murdered was a woman zip-tied to a pipe in the corner, some distance away from the others. While her neck had been stabbed, it didn't look like any major vessels had been damaged. As I bent down to examine the restrained woman, she suddenly jolted awake, screaming in horror. "No, make it stop. Get out." "I don't want to." I grabbed her in an attempt to keep her still, worried she might worsen her injury. Calm down, calm down. You're safe," I kept repeating. Her fear quickly turned to despair as she noticed the corpses littering the floor in front of her. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to," she cried. I grabbed a sedative from my kit and injected it through her suit port, hoping she'd remain conscious but calm enough to relay what had happened at the station. I read the name on her suit, Rosario. "Hey, Rosario, look at me. I need you to tell me what happened here." She calmed, slightly following the injection, but then looked carefully around the room, as if recounting the events that had transpired. "I tried to kill myself. I don't know why. I didn't want to, but the voices, they just kept telling me I had to do it. They were so loud. My team, they pinned me down and tied me up, but it didn't help them. I'm so sorry." She was still breaking down. I looked back at the dead crew members littering the floor. If they'd managed to tie her up before she died, then who had killed them? What about the others? They just started killing each other. But it wasn't them. The things, they changed them. Thing made them do it. Her rambles were only semi-coherent, but her last statement piqued my morbid curiosity. "Whom? What things?" "They came from the growth. We didn't even see them, but they were there. They got inside our heads and made us do it." "I'm sorry, please, you gotta believe me." She kept rambling for a couple of minutes. I gestured for Pavel to administer a stronger sedative. She would only make things worse by panicking, and if we stood even the slightest chance of bringing her back safely to the station, she had to be calmed. "Don't worry, Rosario. We'll get you out of here." I promise. Within a minute she was unconscious, and we brought in a stretcher to transport her. The rest of the crew were beyond saving, too mutilated to even fit them into body bags. We had no choice but to leave them behind. We boarded our mini-sub and immediately received a transmission from the main base. Mini-sub Sigma, do you copy? Yeah, we made contact with Station 12. There are multiple casualties, but we're bringing back one survivor. Prepare the medical bay. Mini-sub Sigma, we've lost contact with Stations 4, 6, 8, and 9. We're detecting multiple unidentified signatures in the vicinity. Return to Neptune immediately. Wait, what's happening? There was a brief pause before the next transmission. Are you there? Then they said the words I dreaded most since being assigned to the project, a simple sentence I thought was years away from ever becoming reality. The Abyssals have awakened. We secured the injured crew member to our mini-sub, making sure she wouldn't slip free as we sped back toward the base. What do you mean, awakened? How can they be here already? Omar asked over the radio. No response from Neptune. Navigating near the ocean floor wasn't an easy task at high speeds. With the thermal vents and rugged terrain, it was a treacherous journey, and the ever-present sediment increased the risk of collision as we maneuvered toward the base. Mini-sub Sigma, we're initiating lockdown. Docking Bay 2 will remain open until you arrive, but we're putting you into quarantine. Understood. We'll be there in 10 minutes. I nervously scanned the dark waters, looking for any sign of movement. Whatever creatures had emerged from that polyp growth, they had killed the entire crew aboard BDS Station 12. We spotted more growths on the way, each with the same shell-like structure, covered in polyps, some ruptured, others still intact, pulsating and twitching. They looked almost wet with a strange bioluminescent secretion that shimmered unnaturally in the abyssal darkness. We docked the mini-sub outside the bay and transferred Rosario into one of the service airlocks. Inside, we were met with the blaring sound of an alarm and a set of isolation chambers prepared for each of us. On the other side of the airlock stood my supervisor. We'll need you all to get inside the chambers while we run decontamination, the captain ordered nervously. Anthony Morgan was normally a calm individual, even in the most stressful situations, so seeing him on the brink of panic alerted me to the true gravity of our predicament. Anthony, is it true? Are they really here? He nodded solemnly. Not another word needed to be said. I knew then that the next several hours would decide the fate not only for us, but for the rest of humanity. After we placed ourselves into the isolation chambers, they prepared to transport us to the medical bay. Do we have any footage from the BDS stations? I asked. Captain Morgan shook his head. Most of it was corrupted after the growths appeared on the seafloor. We're trying to restore what we can, but I'm not too hopeful. I'll let you know if we find anything. For now, just do as the medics tell you. The medics transported my security team and me to an isolation room. Rosario, who'd sustained serious injuries to her neck, was placed in a separate room adjacent to ours. It was a research facility, which meant it had glass walls for observation. There was no privacy as we changed into sterile clothing. You better keep her restrained. She's not herself, Omar warned as the medics placed Rosario in a bed. By the time we'd been put into quarantine, the entirety of Neptune had been placed under complete lockdown. Anyone still outside the main base was on their own. Behind our glass walls, we could see crew members rushing around in panic, each trying to fulfill their duties at record pace. All the while, alarms continued blaring, orders were shouted through speaker systems, and we could do nothing but wait uselessly, trapped in isolation. Captain Morgan called me over to the intercom, briefing me on the situation. Marcus will have your test results in an hour or so. In the meantime, we're trying to establish contact with anyone outside the main base, if they're still alive out there. We need to figure out a safe way to bring them inside. Has anyone responded? No, but we've detected multiple heat signatures in the vicinity. A few of them match the crew's transponders, but he trailed off. But what? There are too many signatures. We don't have that many people stationed in the outer perimeter. It's them, I said, my voice filled with premature defeat. Yo, we've recovered some footage from Station 12. I'll send you the files. I turned to the computer mounted on the wall and entered my credentials. A single video file had been uploaded to my profile, a few minutes of salvaged footage. I hit play and prepared myself for the worst. What greeted us was an overhead view of Station 12's interior, only an hour before we entered. The crew relaxed in their leisure area, joking around and waiting for their shift to end. I immediately recognized Rosario standing in the corner, oddly quiet. She seemed to be concentrating on something off camera. "Hey guys, you hear that?" The crew fell silent, and all of them listened intently to the quiet surroundings. "Hear what? I don't know," it sounds like. Without even finishing her sentence, Rosario grabbed a pen from a nearby table and started stabbing herself in the neck. Blood gushed from the wounds, and the crew immediately rushed to pin her down. "Stop! Let me go. I need to do this," Rosario yelled in protest. "Get the damn zip ties, boss, there's something outside. What are you talking about?" After securing Rosario to the wall, the crew gathered to stare out of the minuscule viewport, all of them in shock from what they saw. After a minute of disbelief, their supervisor grabbed the radio to alert Neptune of the unidentified object. "Neptune, this is BDS Station 12. We've found something on the seabed. I don't think it's of natural origin." In response, only static could be heard. "The radio is cutting out. Tran, would you check the connection?" Without responding, the crew member walked over to his supervisor and stabbed him with a screwdriver. One of the others lifted her weapon in a hopeless attempt at de-escalating the situation. "Tran, drop it," she ordered. But instead of complying, she turned her weapon on herself. Looking confused and without hesitation, she shot her own leg. The rest of the crew staggered in disarray, some trying to help their supervisor, while others wanted to grab the gun from their coworker. The man with the screwdriver had already killed his boss and turned his attention to himself. He proceeded to repeatedly stab his own abdomen, crying as he did so. One by one, they all fell to the same inexplicable madness. Within only a few minutes, every crew member had succumbed to their wounds, all save for Rosario, who had been tied to the wall just in time to save her life. The footage cut off abruptly, and we all stood speechless in front of the blank screen. "What about the other stations?" Jacinta asked. "Do we really want to witness that again?" Pavel responded, his voice trembling. As we discussed the undeniable reality of an emerging threat, we started hearing groans coming from Rosario's room. She was waking up, thankfully still restrained to the bed. "You're safe, Rosario. The doctor is on his way. Just stay calm, they're all dead," she sobbed. "We should give her more sedatives," Jacinta suggested. "Where's the damn doctor?" Neptune's head physician was a biologist of advancing age. Alicia would be his new apprentice, specifically chosen for the position. By the time the doctor eventually retired, she would take over. They both arrived alongside Natali a few minutes later. We briefed them on what had happened, and Dr. Kuznetsov suited up to examine Rosario. Captain Morgan finally returned after patrolling the area. He'd locked down our entire section and posted guards at each airlock should something breach through. Staff was scarce, but each employee, guard, or scientist had been trained to deal with situations like this. "Doctor Kuznetsov, have they briefed you on the patient?" Captain Morgan asked. "Yes, I'm aware of the situation," he stated matter-of-factly. "Alicia will join me inside. We're going to have to cut your training short. I've always thought hands-on experience works best anyway." Together they entered the isolated room. Natali stood guard outside, ready to intervene should Rosario fall into psychosis once again. What followed was a series of uncomfortable but necessary questions. Rosario, who'd attempted to kill herself only hours earlier, was undoubtedly shaken from the experience, but whatever trance she'd been in had long since passed. Halfway through the examination, another alarm sounded throughout the base. Captain Morgan immediately reached for his radio, demanding an explanation. "Section 9, this is Security Chief Morgan." "What's going on? They took explosives from the facility," a voice screamed from the other end. "Who? I don't know. We tracked a transponder from BDS Station 7. We tried contacting them over the radio, but they ignored us. Is the breach sealed?" Morgan asked. "Yeah, but half my team died from decompression trauma. The rest of us are about to suit up in case the seal fails, but I don't know." He paused, and a lot of hammering noise could be heard through the radio. "They're coming through the steel." Everybody fall bas. What followed was a vague, rushing sound before the call got interrupted. "Damn it, I gotta go," Morgan exclaimed. "Natali, stay here and help the doctor." "Absolutely not. I'm coming with you." "They'll need all the help they can get," she argued. "What about us?" I asked. "Sorry, Marcus. You have to stay in isolation until the tests come back." "Don't worry, they'll come let you out ASAP." The two of them rushed down the long corridors toward Section 9, while we remained trapped with no chance to help. "Doctor." Kuznetsov and Alicia finished examining Rosario and called for our test results to be expedited. 20 minutes passed as we waited for any updates on the situation. The occasional banging was the only sound keeping us company as it echoed through the outer corridors of Neptune. Over the radio, I could hear requests for additional security coming from various sections around the base, calls no one had the capacity to answer. I felt utterly useless, stuck in isolation. Then we heard the sound of multiple footsteps rushing down the corridor. "Stay with me," Natali shouted. They rushed past us carrying 2 stretchers. On one of them lay Captain Morgan, bleeding profusely from multiple harpoon wounds to his abdomen. "Natali, what happened?" I asked in shock. She ignored me as they brought the injured personnel into a separate room. Though we couldn't directly see them, we could hear the utter horror in their voices as they futilely tried to stop the bleeding. It was a hopeless case, and from prior experience, I knew Morgan wouldn't survive. Only minutes later, he had bled out. Natali came over to our room, staring at me through the glass. Her eyes were red from a mixture of panic and despair. "Nat, is he dead? I had to. He just went crazy. We were investigating the broken seal. Even with the breach secured, something got through. Every single person who hadn't evacuated Section 9 died instantly. How many? 37. Jesus Christ," I muttered. She sobbed for a moment before continuing, her blood-covered hands visibly shaking from the ordeal. As we suited up, Anthony said he heard something. I'd already put my helmet on and couldn't hear what he was talking about, but then another loud bang echoed through the corridor, followed by an alarm. "Whatever these things are, they're infiltrating the station." He shot the others point blank, and he would have killed me too. I didn't have a choice. I had to defend myself. I only wanted to stop him, but the first bolt didn't even faze him. I just kept firing until he dropped his weapon. I killed him. It was me. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. We didn't get a chance to continue the conversation before the medics came to release us. Even without conclusive test results, we had been ordered to evacuate the area. The entire crew aboard Neptune was retreating to Section 5, the central and most secure hub of the station. They're sealing all the pressure doors in 5 minutes. "We have to go now," one of them ordered. With no time to suit up, we started rushing toward Section 5, ready to confront whatever had invaded the station. I just don't understand. They weren't supposed to emerge for another 5 years. How is this possible? I wondered aloud. No idea. It doesn't make any sense, Omar replied. On our way, we passed numerous sealed sections, all breached, their atmosphere replaced by crushing pressure housing little more than debris and the corpses of our deceased colleagues. Multiple distress calls emitted from my radio, but we could do nothing to help. All we could hope was that as many people as possible made it into Section 5, where we'd organize a defense against the invaders. Marcus, you there? Please respond, a voice called over the radio. I recognized it, one of the senior security officers, Octavia Wells. I'm here. We're en route to Section 5. Are you safe? We need you and the doctor to come to the main lab immediately. The lab. Why? She paused for a moment, letting out a half chuckle. We captured one of them. Trillions of dollars spent. Neptune had been the most expensive project ever undertaken by mankind. It made the cost of the International Space Station seem like pocket change in comparison. But for its purpose, it was worth it. Our goal had been simple, to protect humanity from an inevitable emergence, one foreseen since the early 1970s. We'd spent decades preparing, yet despite our best efforts, it had only taken the Abyssals a few hours to shut us down. In one swift assault, they disabled our entire BDS defense grid, killed more than half our crew, and next on their list was the surface world. Octavia had already gathered a team of doctors and engineers at the laboratories in Section 3, but with half the station exposed to crushing pressure, getting there would be challenging. Rather than crawling through the separate ventilation system, we suited up and traversed directly through the sealed-off sections, weapons in hand and eyes alert for enemies. We slowly made our way toward the lab, praying that the captured Abyssal could provide the answers we so desperately sought. So they really caught one? Natali asked. I sure hope so. I doubt we'd have the means of interrogating it, I responded. Besides, it's time for payback. These bastards killed half our crew without so much as a second thought, Jacinta interjected. Once we finally reached Section 3, we were met with a set of heavy pressure doors. They were reinforced enough to withstand the crushing depths and able to contain a full section breach. They had to be manually activated and could only be opened from the inside. Octavia, you in there? I asked over the radio. Marcus, yeah, it's me. I've got my security team with me. Would you please open the damn door? An airlock separated the lab and the rest of Section 3. It had been built in the early stages of Neptune's construction and functioned more as a miniature station than part of the main facility. Luckily, it had maintained its internal pressure despite the numerous breaches nearby. It was a massive dome-like structure divided into several microlabs, each sealed off, hidden, and distributed to different research teams operating in isolation from one another. At the very end was an autopsy room that had been used to study the effects of pressure on marine life, but now it would serve as a place for abyssal examination. Dr. Kuznetsov and Alicia had arrived with a team of engineers just in time to escape the breach in Section 9. Whether they liked it or not, they were trapped in the laboratory without enough pressure suits to evacuate everyone. Octavia met us by the entrance. She'd sustained a massive gash across her face, rupturing her right eye, covered by a crude bandage. She guided us toward the autopsy room. In one of the corners, I noticed a pile of corpses. While I didn't personally know them, I recognized them as lab maintenance crew. What happened to them? I asked. I was escorting Dr. Kuznetsov and his assistant over here, making sure none of the Abyssals got to them. As we arrived, one of the crew members complained about a strange sensation before attacking. I tried to restrain him, but he stabbed his coworkers. I had no choice but to neutralize him and the other two, she explained, pointing to their self-inflicted wounds. They just grabbed the knife and started mutilating themselves. I couldn't stop them, she added somberly. It wasn't until the adrenaline hit that I noticed that creature standing in the corridor. I can't even explain it, just have a look, she led us into the autopsy room. There on the table lay a massive being. Though it had vague humanoid features such as appendages resembling arms and fins, they were grossly disproportionate to anything functional in our world. Its skin was sickly pale blue and covered in a bioluminescent mucus-like substance. The appendages extended far beyond its elongated body, which tapered into a powerful tail. Instead of recognizable sensory organs, the head was covered in deep, dark cavities and feathery gill-like structures. Multiple harpoon bolts protruded from its central mass, which I assumed had immobilized it, but despite the high-caliber weapons used, there was remarkably little damage to the creature's tissue. "Is it dead?" Natali asked nervously. "No idea, Doctor," Kuznetsov responded. "Its body temperature hasn't changed, and it doesn't appear to bleed conventionally. Our only comfort is that it doesn't show any responsiveness." You made it to the end of the stories. That means it's the perfect time to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And if you haven't already, leave a like and drop a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have a great time relaxing, and good night.